Laura, thank you for taking the time today to talk to us about the journey that BT have been on in terms of transforming planning, budgeting, and forecasting. And so I thought a good place to start might be to ask you about some of the challenges that BT faced with planning, budgeting, and forecasting, and what you needed to address.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Martin. Thank you. So one of the big challenges in BT was really around the amount of time it takes to run a planning cycle. So, full end to end, we're talking, 6 months. And, in, business today, the world moves on in that time. So almost by the time you finished your plan, something else has happened that, you haven't included. So the length of time was a big one for us. And really the sheer volume of time and effort that goes into creating those plans, and it links very much to what moves the dial. We plan in BT for everything, so at the lowest level, and therefore it's a big, long process with lots of people involved. And it means by doing that really detailed bottoms up, you do miss the focus then on what is actually moving the dial and where should we be focusing our time and effort to drive the most value out of our planning cycle. So those were the three big ones really for BT.
And do you think was it more around efficiency, accuracy, or driving insight, or was it a combination of all of those that you were looking to improve?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And it was a combination, I think, of all of those. So the biggest one I think that stood out was around standardizing. So standardizing the process itself. Within BT, we've got, 6 big operating units or business units that in their own right are companies themselves. So how do you drive, all of those individual units to a standard process, a standard set of data, and a standard output? So that was really one of the big things that we were looking to drive. Obviously accuracy, and continuing to make sure that at a total BT level, we maintained a high level of accuracy. And insight very much linked to that in that, today everything happens off system. It's not visible, from a group perspective, how these forecasts are built up. And so actually that was a big driver, being able to then have insights, not just at a total BT group level, but at a lower level business unit, to really help group make the steering decisions that are needed across BT.
And it sounds like a lot of change, Laura. How did you get this transformation going? What were some of the first steps that you took?
There was quite a few firsts, I think, in the program. So I think the first one really, we started this program very much as a controls lens. How do we improve the controls that we have today? We have an aging estate, so how do we also, maintain? And very quickly that kind of transformed into something else. We did a benchmarking exercise probably over 2 years ago now, which really showed the value that we could drive out of our planning and reporting processes. So, around the process, around the efficiency of the people, around the focus. And really that then spurred us on from a BT perspective to look at what else do we go after, above and beyond the controls and the legacy decommissioning problems. So that was really the spur. We spent time looking at vision documents and drafting all of that information. But really, it's how you articulate your journey, I think, that is important. The vision is probably fairly generic, right, across all companies. You want to standardize, you want to automate, you want to use digital tools. But the real tricky part is saying, well, how do I go from where I am today to where do I want to get to? And that was a big bit for BT. So that was the key focus areas really for us.
And Laura, you talked about all the things there that you had to do to get going. How did you bring stakeholders on that journey to get started on that journey?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I think some of it from a vision and from a benchmarking perspective, people could see, where we could get to. So I think actually taking stakeholders on that journey was relatively easy in terms of the buy-in for the program. The tricky part was really around then how you mobilize all of the resources and how you make sure that within each of the business units and in group, everyone's pulling in the same direction and resources are mobilized. So what we ended up with was very much a matrix structure, where we had sort of transformation leads from each of the units who worked very much with the program around driving that agenda and driving that change back into their units as well. So the stakeholder for us engagement at a senior level was probably the easiest one. They had their eye on the prize and could see where we can get to. The more challenge was operationally that engagement around how people manage their BAU roles and the asks of a program as well.
And Laura, interestingly, there you talked about all the different stakeholders that you had to, get in order to mobilise the transformation journey. I guess, interestingly, there's a lot of talk now around connected planning and how you work across different departments in order to get, as you say, an accurate and efficient plan. What does connected planning, mean to you in your own words?
Yeah. So, I think for me, it's about joining everything together. The financial plan that comes out of the end of a planning cycle, needs to be connected to everything that feeds into it. So, how do you make sure that your financial plan is connected to your sales plan, to your commercial plan, to your HR or workforce plans? And for me, it's almost putting a steel thread through all of those things to make sure that you understand, when you bring your plan together from a financial perspective, what are all the levers and drivers underneath. It's important, that connected part. Otherwise, a plan just sits in, splendid isolation without being able to react to what's changing in the business units.
And maybe a pointed question, but how connected do you think your plans were before you started your transformation journey?
Not massively connected, I would probably say. So we've done things, or we've tried to build things, I guess, in more of a kind of iterative way as well. So we weren't very connected before. We started, we're a big S4 transformation program, but we started to look at how do we drive other changes. So working with Anaplan, we looked at actually using then some models to start driving, some driver-based planning and trying to drive some connection between drivers and financials, rather than just have a financial plan, which again, is it an increase in base or is it an increase in average revenue that is driving the changes? So we started that journey, but yeah, we've still got a long way to go.
It's great to hear that progress is being made, and Laura, you talked about some of the things that you've already done, but I guess what has been achieved so far on your journey?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting journey, I can say that much. So, for the last 3 years, we've taken BT on a huge journey. We started off with a project around the information model. So, BT today has multiple ERPs, it has multiple business units which are structured, in their own ways. So when you bring data together, you're comparing apples and pears. And so the first thing we wanted to do with all of the CFOs and all of the FCs was to say, what is the information model that will drive BT's reporting and planning now and performance management effectively and in the future? We have to remember we need to future proof, what we're implementing, has a long shelf life. And so that was one of the biggest firsts in our transformation program, was defining that information model, defining the performance framework that sat around that. And then therefore the initial chart of accounts for what we then implemented in SAP. And, that was no mean feat, to be honest. We have 100,000 cost centers. We had 60,000 GL accounts. We have businesses that are run on a contracts lens or a projects lens. We have businesses that are run, more customer facing and run on a product lens. So how do you find an information model that caters for everybody? And how do you drive that standardization? Obviously, everyone wants to standardize, but ideally to their way. And that was part of the initial challenges. But that was one of our big kind of firsts, I would say, as a program. And then, like I said as well, accelerating some of the delivery, SAP and the transformation journey we're on is big. And so how do you get some early wins? So, by doing some of the outlooks and models that we built through Anaplan, that's helped to get the business's mindset shifted and start thinking about drivers and start thinking about, well, rather than do this in Excel, I could do this in a tool and I could do it in a more efficient, standardized way. And really all of that has been laying the foundations for what we're doing in BT around reporting and planning, budgeting and forecasting.
Excellent. And Laura, you talked about, when you said about setting out the vision, you talked about digital tools. And a bit like connected planning, there's a lot of talk now around algorithmic forecasting or predictive forecasting. What's your experience been with sort of new digital tools and technologies such as that?
Yeah. So we've dabbled, I would probably say. So, about 2 years ago, we ran a predictive forecasting pilot. So actually using out of bundle call revenue was one of our kind of pilot areas, and really building that up from scratch. So, sourcing the data, making sure we've got the database, making sure we've got the coding to support it. So that was my kind of first look at predictive planning in that sense. And I think there was definitely some lessons learned from that. We went into it with a view about, how do we create it in a more accurate way, and got into the weeds, I think. But actually, when you stand back from what we delivered, we'd built a beast, but we'd built it with lots of different conversations, and it was very accurate and it had lots of data in it. But as a proof of concept or as a pilot, it wasn't sustainable. And there was challenges back from the stakeholders around, well, actually, could we have done this in a more efficient way? So looked at 15 drivers rather than 55 drivers, or whatever it was. So we dabbled there, and I think very quickly learned that we need to be really clear on the outcomes that we want to achieve and how it embeds in the processes. Again, there's no point building something that sits in splendid isolation when you want to think about how does it fit into your forecasting process or your planning process. And I guess we've taken those lessons learned and we've looked more recently at other predictive areas as well. So around product forecasting for our mobile and broadband business. So again, how do we now start integrating that with our planning processes, and how do we start leveraging that data set in SAP? We very much, like I said, we're an S4 big transformation program. So at the heart of all of this is trying to create that single version of the truth and remove duplication and drive that standardization. So yeah, we've started to dabble, Martin, sorry, I guess is and we've tried a few different things, but we haven't landed it yet in terms of fully working and embedded in our kind of planning processes.
Well, I think it's clear from the conversation that you've tried, and you might not have succeeded on every single one, but actually that's part of the journey. As you say, and I think trying some of these things and failing and learning the lessons is important as part of the process as well. And Laura, with that in the back of our minds, thinking back to when you started this journey, if you could leave one piece of advice, I guess, for those that are listening and watching today, what would it be to those that are about to embark upon their own transformation journey?
Yeah, I guess it's making me laugh just because I'm kind of thinking of two, I guess, things that spring to mind that people have said to me over our journey, which is almost don't run before you can walk. I get accused of that sometimes. And it's really about trying to make sure you've got the basics and the foundation in place is really, really key. And the other one, don't eat the elephant whole. So, again, dividing things up into smaller problem statements and working it through that way rather than trying to do everything all at once is really important. And the one thing actually, so I know you said one and I've done three, but is around, I think planning is an ecosystem, right? Like I came into this thinking, we have we've got our core models in SAP, everything has to be SAP. And actually planning, it's about, using the right tool for the right job. And it's about having an appreciation that everything needs to connect to enable your planning journey. But that doesn't mean you have to be wedded to one thing, and you can try different tools and different techniques. And yeah, just realizing, I guess, that there's a lot more nuances in planning than possibly things like reporting. Sorry, that's 3 things, Martin, but I've learned a lot. I think it's fair to say.
Well, Laura, I think if we pass on more than one lesson, I'm sure that's absolutely fine. But Laura, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today about your transformation journey. It's been great talking to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Martin. Appreciated.